Bob was a member of the MacArthur Foundation Research Network on Adolescent Development and Juvenile Justice. He co-edited Youth on Trial, a developmental perspective on juvenile justice, which is in the University of Chicago Press, the year 2000. From 1991 to the year 2012, he was a gubernatorial appointee to Pennsylvania State Advisory Group that distributes federal funds in Pennsylvania and advises the governor regarding juvenile justice policy. He is immediate past president of the American Bar Association's Commission on Youth at Risk. Juvenile Law Center helped uncover the scandal depicted in this year's featured documentary, Kids for Cash. Welcome.
Thank you. That's the danger when you submit your own bio. I don't quite how to refer to yourself. So, thank you, Danny. And I want to thank Representative Cardenas and his staff for calling this hearing. I'm going to say basically what he said, just use more words. My task this afternoon is to set the table for experts who are doing the hard work of prevention science. Juvenile justice goes through cycles of reform, and the good news, as you've heard, is that we're now at an upbeat moment. Today there's powerful public recognition of the science showing that teens are different. As Denny said, adolescent development is a unique time of experimentation and risk-taking. It is also, as Dr. Lawrence Steinberg tells us in his new book, Age of Opportunity, which came out last week, that adolescence is our last great chance to mold adolescents' futures. We also know more than ever about prevention and evidence-based programming. Over 20 years ago, Dr. David Hawkins and Richard Catalano, who you'll hear from next, pioneered community efforts to address risk and protective factors for youth. Ever since Del Elliott established the Center for the Study and Prevention of Violence, we have seen that there are evidence-based programs and policies that can keep kids out of the juvenile justice system, reduce unnecessary placement of them when they are in the system, and reduce reoffending. There is thus large agreement among many in our field that youth need room to make and learn from their mistakes, that the justice system should not be used for minor misbehavior that is typical for teens, and that public safety can be maintained while giving youth opportunities to discover the people they will become. Despite this emerging bipartisan consensus, state juvenile justice systems are riddled with vestiges of a punitive past. Too many youth are still labeled delinquent for typical adolescent misbehavior. Too many youth are unnecessarily confined. Too many suffer lifelong consequences because of their involvement with the system. There are several basic interconnected challenges for this committee and for Congress. The first is how Congress can encourage states to divert youth from the system through systematic decriminalization of minor misbehavior and through enhancing the capacities of other public systems, such as schools, to teach youth how to behave. Another is increasing the chances that state systems are fair, proportional, and developmentally appropriate. 40 years ago, led by Senator Burge Bai, Congress passed the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act. In addition to removing children from adult jails, the new law provided federal funds to states that eliminated status offenses from the jurisdiction of the juvenile court. JJDPA has been largely successful, but it has been remarkably underfunded. As a member for 21 years of Pennsylvania State Advisory Group, I saw the power of federal funding to serve as a catalyst for promoting positive outcomes. The cycles of juvenile justice reform have reflected different views of how to respond to teens who misbehave or commit crimes. In response to the punitive cycle of the early 1990s, the MacArthur Foundation in 1996 launched a research network on adolescent development and juvenile justice. The network's insights led the U.S. Supreme Court 9 years later to end the juvenile death penalty and ushered in a paradigm shift in thinking about kids and crime. The network's research has been bolstered by new findings in neuroscience that describe ways adolescent behavior, specifically emotional regulation, is a function of the developing teenage brain. Collectively, the new knowledge has led to legislative reform like that in Connecticut and Illinois, which recently raised the age of juvenile court jurisdiction from 16 and 17 to 18, and to case law that has reshaped juvenile justice in America. It is fair to say that in 2014, social science, behavioral science, and neuroscience require that the law treat juveniles differently than adults. Unfortunately, these cases and state law changes have not undone prior cycles of juvenile justice policy. Too many youth are still arrested for minor misbehavior. Schools still refer too many youth to juvenile court, hoping that the court will serve as the school's disciplinarian. Many juvenile justice facilities remain unsafe places. Juvenile records still impede youth's life chances. For the vast majority of youth who misbehave, the tug of war over juvenile justice policy is largely about challenges that should frame congressional action. What kind of youthful misbehavior should we criminalize? What should be the consequences of court involvement? Advocates today celebrate states that are returning to an early 20th century notion of juvenile justice, appropriately constrained by constitutional safeguards and fortified by new insights into adolescent development. Congressional action is essential to accelerate the pace of reform that promotes prevention and recognizes adolescent differences, while at the same time promoting public safety. These are very compatible goals. Imagine a future that uses the juvenile justice system less. This means diverting youth from the system entirely. It means less frequent use of institutional care through diversion from placement and enhanced re-entry policies that reduce length of stay and recidivism. It involves having fewer life consequences for youth who are involved with the juvenile justice system. The best way to divert youth from the system is to avoid criminalizing minor, typically adolescent misbehavior. Everyday decision makers refer some youth to the juvenile justice system while directing others into different youth and family serving systems. Indeed, many youth in the four major youth serving systems, education, juvenile justice, child welfare, and behavioral health, are remarkably similar to one another, even though they may be assigned different labels. Youth can be referred to different systems based on their traits or conduct, or based on the traits or conduct of their parents. Unfortunately, this sorting process often reflects disparities in class or race. Many referrals to juvenile court come from schools. Many of those referrals involve special education students. Most of these referrals can be avoided through attention to developing and implementing the student's individualized education program, especially the IEP's behavior management plan. The effort to stem school referrals is part of a larger effort to promote diversion from juvenile court. The MacArthur Foundation Models for Change initiative has supported a cultural shift in which diversion is again in fashion. Diversion, which is a concept as old as the juvenile court itself, recognizes that many youth in the juvenile justice system do not need to be in it. Public safety can be achieved through other means that are just as effective in preventing crime while reducing stigma to youth and giving them opportunities to become adults who contribute to society. Diversion engages families, it saves dollars. Done well, diverting youth entirely from the juvenile justice system can protect the public and effectively meet youth's needs. An example, many youth who enter the justice system have co-occurring behavioral disorders. Congress can support development of more refined screening and assessment tools that will do more than assess risks. They will also address youth's strengths and needs and lead to services that divert youth who would otherwise be heading to juvenile court. Youth who misbehave can often be helped with little more than a reprimand and referral to community-based services. Some communities do this informally. Others, like Miami-Dade County Civil Citation Program, refer children who have committed a minor first-time misdemeanor offense to the Juvenile Services Department, where they receive an assessment and targeted interventions. Youth are not arrested. Program participation is short-term. Upon successful completion, no entry is made into criminal databases. Diversion is about more than keeping youth out of the justice system. It also means reducing unnecessary use of institutional care. Since 1992, the Annie E. Casey Foundation has advanced this value through its Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative. JDAI has shown how to advance public safety and save dollars while reducing the use of pretrial detention for youth charged with crimes. Congress should support a reduction in what James Bell of the Burns Institute describes as America's addiction to incarceration. A deinstitutionalization trend has begun in states like California, New York, and Texas, which have reduced the use of training schools for delinquent youth. Other states like Illinois, Ohio, and Pennsylvania have shown how fiscal incentives can reduce unnecessary out-of-home placement. Congress can promote the use of community-based services and of smaller, friendlier facilities for youth who must be separated from their communities. Missouri has demonstrated that large congregate care programs for delinquents are not only counterproductive, they are unnecessary. Smaller programs, close to home and family, that treat youth with respect will increase the chances that youth leaving the system will become productive adults. High-quality reentry planning and programming are essential parts of the pathway to productive adulthood. The federal government invested in reentry through the Second Chances Act of 2007. Implementation of the federal law has largely been devoted to adult offenders. Congress can increase state attention to reentry of juveniles. Done well, reentry reduces lengths of stay. It connects youth to caring adults, appropriate educational opportunities, and career and technical training. It ensures that youth have a safe place to live and continuity of health care. It is a deep-end prevention program. The juvenile justice system exists to give youth better life chances than the criminal justice system. While there has been choppy progress in many state juvenile justice systems, too many recent laws establish unnecessary barriers to success at the same time as they purport to provide room for reform. The general public believes that juvenile records are sealed or expunged. It believes that being in juvenile court gives youth a free pass to adulthood. These beliefs are wrong. Juvenile records are rarely expunged. When expungement is available under state law, it is rarely automatic. Juvenile court is hardly a free pass. There are collateral consequences to juvenile court adjudications that last well beyond a youth's court involvement. Too many youth have records that haunt them for years. In some cases, these records will last for a lifetime. These records can impede youth's ability to secure housing, get jobs, join the military, pursue higher education, or receive public benefits. This is particularly important to the effort to end racial and ethnic disparities in the juvenile justice system. Because youth of color are more likely than their white counterparts to be arrested and convicted for youthful crimes, they are also more likely to be burdened by records well into adulthood. Thus, it is even more important to these youth that their pathway to mainstream success not be inappropriately impeded by juvenile records. Nowhere is the hardship greater than for youth adjudicated delinquent for so-called sex offenses. A minuscule number of youth commit crimes of the sort that legitimately raise public alarm. Most are not serial pedophiles. They are not like adult sex offenders. And recidivism rates among juvenile sexual offenders are exceedingly low. And yet state and federal governments have enacted laws that shackle youth for life. Congress should amend the Adam Walsh Act along the lines recommended and raised on the registry published last year by Human Rights Watch. The juvenile court has always tried to manage youth who are sexually active. That is one reason that the latest status offense is sexting. States have begun creating new crimes directed at minors who sext. Legislators have faith that the criminal law will deter teenagers from using technology to transmit sexually suggestive photographs. Their optimistic belief in the Federal Crimes Code does little to promote wise adolescent behavior. It does, however, create a new class of young offenders. This is an example of how one can prevent crime by not calling something a crime in the first place. Delinquency prevention is sound crime control policy. Prevention programs teach youth to behave responsibly. They address problems that undermine pro-social behavior. A bonus is that research-based prevention programs are also cost-effective. You'll hear about those from other witnesses. The good news is that the cost of converting systems from institutions to community-based services is relatively small. Juvenile Law Center and colleagues did a study 20 years ago that examined how debt financing might pay for deconstruction costs, not as it pays for the building of prisons and juvenile facilities. The surprising finding was that it didn't cost much to convert systems from institution-based to community-based. The kind of idea we promoted 20 years ago is fashionable today through social impact bonds. The reality, however, is that converting systems from institution-based to community-based needed to involve a lot of money. With a relatively small appropriation, Congress can provide states with deconstruction funding that will bridge the cost of conversion. In short, the juvenile justice system should be a last resort. When it must be used, it should avoid interventions that unnecessarily disrupt normal adolescent development. It should maintain or build connections with caring adults. The system should give youth opportunities to reform and provide them with the skills necessary to be contributing members of society. This means reducing collateral consequences of arrest and adjudication for delinquent acts. It means more opportunities to expunge juvenile records. It means avoiding the impulse to create new crimes like sexting or other technology-based conduct. And it means decriminalizing minor misbehavior that sends too many youth to the justice system without any benefit to the youth or to the public. Debbie, that concludes my testimony, and if you or others have questions,
Okay.
we could take them.
Are there any questions for Dr. Lawrence? Yes.
I'm just kind of curious. I mean, you mentioned sexting as something that's kind of making a lot of waves in the media. I'm curious about how you feel about how we're treating bullying in the same ways as people are treating it as, you know, a kind of criminal activity on the part of children or adolescents. And I'm just
I think bullying has to be treated very, very carefully as, yet again, something that comes into the public attention, and we tend to over-criminalize and over-punish for it. The term is, in the first place, quite vague. I think we know extreme versions of it when we see it, and those are the ones that legitimately find their way to juvenile court. But most isolated incidents of bullying, you know, for sure, can be dealt with by schools and parents. I commend to you Emily Bazelon's book that came out in early 2013 on bullying, which sort of captures the complexity of the relationship among the bullied and the bullying. It's not always clear who's bullying whom. You know, we quite often see in juvenile court the person who calls first. And it's like the referee capturing a retaliatory foul, you know, to use a basketball analogy. But it has to be treated seriously. But most kids don't need to be criminalized to treat it seriously.
Yes.
Hello, Margarita Chavez from Senator Tom Udall's office. I have a
Yeah,
question.
your office calls me every night for contributions. It's really a red
Okay. That's all I wanted to call. So one question that I have relates to the screening tools that you mentioned. You suggested needing a greater screening tool in order to prevent this recidivism and essentially prevent that entry in the first place. What kind of changes would you recommend for those essentially behavioral health and other screening tools?
Well, there are sort of many evidence-based screening tools in place, and I expect that other panelists will address them. They screen for different things, for different kinds of risks. So it depends on what you're screening for. The Massachusetts Youth Screening Instrument does mental health screening for kids in detention who are newly arrested to capture early on really serious mental health issues. There are other instruments that are being used in places like Pennsylvania or Louisiana, the SAVERY, the youth level of risk screening tool, captures mental health issues, drug and alcohol use, but also captures other qualities that might lead folks to divert in the first place. You know, so I think each community needs to adapt a tool that will work for it, but to be sure that there is evidence behind them, you know, because there are a lot of faux screening tools out there that sell well but don't do the job.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Sam Corner from the National Criminal Justice Association. You started talking a little bit about the class issue and how it's, I guess, for the lower class, juveniles and misbehaviors kind of compounded on their times, I guess. For those that, I guess, run into conflicts, juveniles particularly, and they don't have other social programs or resources in their communities, or their parents can't afford to send them to those places, so they end up in juvenile justice system, what are the options for them, I guess?
Well, I think you'll hear about those from Dr. Catalano, so I won't stand in his way. You know, where communities really take a look at kids and their needs. You know, it's the only thing that I would caution, rather than say badly what Dr. Catalano will say well, is that one should avoid using the juvenile justice system as your primary service delivery system. I mean, we've seen many parents tragically advised, you know, by police, what can I do with my kid? Well, yes, yeah, right. Well, have him arrested, find some pretext.
Yeah.
You know, in the movie Kids for Cash, we see some examples of that where parents who thought they would be helping led to tragic results. So it's, there are ways to do it, but I'll defer to Dr. Carolina, because you'll hear about it.
Yes, sir.
Take one or two more and then search.
Sure. John Foster Day from CSR Incorporated. In your presentation, I was wondering if you could say a bit more how you differentiate between the idea of diversion, prevention, and youth development. It seems to me those three ideas they fall on something of a spectrum, but they certainly are different from each other.
Yes, the difference between diversion and prevention and youth development. Well, I think it's, I mean, the shorthand version, and that's something we could talk about for a few hours, but, you know, I see prevention for this purpose as what the public systems do for kids who are on the cusp of arrest. The prevention programs for kids who are in difficulty in any number of places, from schools, homes, and the like, you know, where some interventions with resources can help. I think everybody is involved in prevention, and all systems should be designed to promote positive youth development, to treat kids as those who have strengths, not weaknesses. I mean, that's been a given now for the last 15 years, I think, in our world. I think that the challenge is that for Congress, where do you invest? You know, and I think as Congress looks at the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, as it looks at funding of community-based programming, most of the things that I would think of that fall into the youth development and prevention areas have been less well-funded than the intervention areas. So there is a continuum. They blur. We can talk more about that at the break.
Yes, ma'am, the last one.
I'm very curious as to when, do you think there should be an intervention or a specificity concerning when bullying has crossed the line? Because I'm a police chaplain, I'm also a director of Juvenile Incorporated in Burlington, New Jersey. And we deal with a lot of bullying issues. And we hear from the police that we can't do anything with the minors. But when does it become an issue where they can?
Well, you know, this is another continuum. It's one of those things where you may, I think all bullying crosses a line. The question is, when does it cross a line for law enforcement purposes?
Yeah.
And I think that's sort of repeated bullying where there's an imbalance of power, including where there's a clear victim who is suffering from it, can get you to the criminal justice system. Isolated incidents of taunting, back and forth insults are the kind of things that you don't want to elevate, you know, to crime. So I think there are lines to be drawn. It's one of those we know it when we see it examples, I think. But I know that Representative Scott has entered the room, and
It's about to.
that's a good time for me to end my last word. It's
Perfect timing.
good to see you again.
Yes. You got something minor called the Judiciary Committee? Will you come speak to us? This is Representative Bobby Scott from Virginia.